Hey everybody, how's it going? My name is Aryan and today we're talking everything S-Log. Let's get started. Before we get started, I apologize for the echo. I just kind of moved into the studio space. It's completely empty. I literally am sitting on a bar stool right now. I just have my light and my mic and my camera and nothing else so far. So the echo is pretty bad, but I kind of wanted to get this video out there today and I'm hoping to get the echo fixed by the next video. Alright everybody, so today's video is all about S-Log. We're going to talk about what it is, how to film with it, how to color correct with it, and I'm going to show you guys my workflow. Maybe you can pick a thing or two that you like. And yeah, so starting with, what is S-Log? So S-Log is basically a picture profile within all of these Sony cameras, which gives you the most flexibility in terms of color grading in post, and it records everything pretty flat, so you can kind of push the saturation and the contrast later on in post to your liking. It's basically shooting the footage as raw as possible, and it's not stylizing it at all, and then you can do all of that later on in post. So why would you want to choose S-Log? Basically, these Sony cameras have incredible dynamic range, but if you want to unlock the full potential of your camera, you need to be filming in S-Log. If you want great colors straight out of camera, you could go with something like no picture profile. That's what I used to do. But if you really want to get the best bang for your buck out of your camera, you need to be using S-Log, and it's going to give you the best results possible. Of course, I understand S-Log can be kind of scary and intimidating at the start, but later in the video I'm going to show you guys some of my settings and my workflow of how I work with S-Log. Maybe that can help you guys out, so stick around until that. Of course, a lot of Sony users would make a case for HLG, but me personally, I never really had any luck with HLG. S-Log has just always worked very well for what I want out of my camera, and I'm going to share some of my settings with you here. Of course, I encourage you guys to go try out different things as well, see what settings work for you, different picture profiles, different combinations, see what works for your look, the style you're going for. This is what I personally prefer, and I'm going to share some of my settings here with you today. Alright, so for picture profile, I typically go with S-Log 2. Now I know you get the most dynamic range out of S-Log 3, but in my personal experience, these Sony cameras are just not good enough when it comes to the bitrate. They shoot 8-bit video, and that's just not good enough when you push S-Log 3. You push that saturation way up, you get weird artifacting in like the corners, and it's overall just not a pleasant experience color grading. With S-Log 2, you're not going to get the best of the best in terms of dynamic range, but you're still going to get something a lot better than no picture profile, let's say. So S-Log 2 is what I recommend, especially for, like, I shoot on the A7 III. It's an 8-bit camera, but if you have like a brand new A7S III which shoots 10-bit video, then absolutely S-Log 3 is the way to go. But if you have any camera that shoots 8-bit, I don't recommend you try S-Log 3. Just stick to S-Log 2, you will thank me later. But the second part is where we switch things up a little bit. So for color mode, you want to go with i709 matrix. This is a little trick that I learned from Caleb Pike from DSLR Video Shooter. He made a video about this and I tried it out. It works like a charm. That's what I've been using ever since, and I've had no issues with it. Let me explain the difference between these two. So by default, the color mode is set to S-Gamut, but we're going to switch it over to i709 matrix, and basically what that's doing is it's adding a little bit of saturation already back into your footage. And that's extremely helpful because mainly people are having issues with, Sony cameras with the 8-bit video. They're having issues with the color falling apart. When they push the saturation in post, it just completely falls apart. And with i709 matrix, you're not pushing the saturation too much to where it's, equivalent of like no picture profile, but it's just kind of like halfway there. So in post, you don't have to push that saturation slider too much. So your footage is not gonna just fall apart completely. If you want to get into more sciencey stuff of this color mode, you can go watch Caleb Pike's video. I'm gonna link it up above. But basically, in a nutshell, it's just adding a little bit of saturation back into your shot. So you don't want to have to push the saturation slider too much. That's about it. It's not really messing with your contrast at all, it's just the saturation, so you still get the benefits of pushing around the contrast later on in post. And in the menus, the only other thing that I change is the detail. I set it all the way to -7. That's just my personal preference. If you guys don't like it, you can leave it at 0, but My personal experience, I like to turn down in-camera sharpening as much as I can. In my opinion, these DSLR mirrorless cameras are just way too sharp these days anyway, so just turning down the in-camera sharpness just helps out overall. And if you really want to, you can add it back a little bit in post, but personally, I leave it at -7 all the time and I've never had any issues. I mean, I would personally rather have, nicer looking skin than you being able to see every little imperfection on my skin, so I recommend leaving it at -7. Alright, so now that we have those 3 things down, let's move into Premiere and I'm going to show you guys my workflow on how I color grade the S-Log footage and get a look similar to this. Alright guys, so getting into color grading, so the first thing we're going to do is open up our color tab up top. That opens up Lumetri scopes on the left and the Lumetri color panel on the right here. So I have the footage I shot earlier today in my timeline, and the first thing I'm going to do is add an adjustment layer. Drag it just on top, that way my edits are not really affecting the raw file and I can get rid of them really easily. So under the basic corrections tab, the first thing I like to mess with is the saturation. So of course we set our color mode to I709 matrix, so we don't have to add too much saturation. It's pretty much, as you can see, already pretty saturated, but I still like to add a little bit. Typically I go to around 110. Here, I'm just going to type in 110 over here. Again, it doesn't do too much, but it's definitely a slight increase in saturation and definitely helps sell the image. So moving on, the next thing I like to do is I mess with my exposure slider. I know typically people don't really mess with exposure when color grading, but I like to drag this up just a little bit. That kind of just helps get the peaks closer to 90. I usually like my peaks to be around 90 instead of 100, but that's just my personal preference. So I start with the exposure. I never really go above like 0.3 or 0.4. Here I think I'm going to stick to 0.3. And then the highlights kind of really do give it the extra push, getting the peaks of my exposure here just around 90. Next thing I like to do is bring down the blacks a little bit, make sure we're not clipping, make sure we're not touching zero. I know I'm touching zero a little bit around the corners, but that's okay because I'm going for like this vignette look, because I have my light blasting just in the middle here, so the middle of the background is naturally a little bit brighter than the edges. So again, as you can see, I brought down my blacks ever so slightly, but mainly I get that dark look with the shadows. So I just bring the shadows down quite a bit here, which kind of darkens up the background a lot, adds most to the contrast, if you will, in the image right about there. So that's bringing down the shadows quite a bit, and this is kind of the look I go for. Now I know my skin tones are pretty accurate because I set a custom profile within my camera when I shoot this. But if you guys want to like double check your skin tones, all you have to do is go into effect controls, make sure you have your footage selected, not the adjustment layer, and draw a mask somewhere on your skin and kind of isolate just the skin there, just like that. Now go back into Lumetri scopes, and as you can see, this line right here is your skin tones line, and this thing lands right on top of the skin tone, so that's pretty accurate skin tones right there. You always want that to land right on the skin tone line. As you can see, if I move the tint slider around, it can kind of affect that a lot, but of course where I am right now is pretty accurate. I noticed that the Sony cameras typically shoot towards the magenta side a lot more, so I just have a custom white balance profile in my camera already that corrects for it. But even if you don't have that, you typically just have to move the tint slider just like -5 or +5 in either direction to get accurate skin tones. It's pretty easy to do, it shouldn't take you too long at all. So after you've adjusted that, you just go back to effect controls and delete the mask there. And now our skin tones are accurate. So since the correcting is all done, now you can throw on that second adjustment layer and go into grading. Here is where you can stylize the image to your liking, or if you want to leave it as natural, you can just leave it just like this and upload it to YouTube. I personally have made myself a custom LUT for my studio kind of talking heads, which I use all the time. It works like a charm. Here I'm just going to disable my color correction layer, and I'm just going to apply my LUT here. There we go. So this is kind of the look I go for when I'm color grading. So this is natural and then graded just like that. But again, that's just personal preference. Whatever, you guys want to do to your footage is completely up to you. If you have some LUTs that you really like from your favorite creators, you can download them, throw them on your footage after correcting them. This is just personally the look that I go for. It's very dark, very moody, kind of towards the green tinted side, and that's just kind of my preference. But you could totally just leave your footage as this, correct it, and upload it from there. It's totally good to go. I think it looks really good. Alright guys, that's it for today's video. If you still have any questions, you can leave them in the comments down below. I'll try to answer them if I can. Don't forget to leave this video a like, subscribe for more videos like this, and I'll see you guys next time.